The moment this title started circulating, fans knew 2026 wasn't going to be a shared chapter anymore. It was the beginning of two very different journeys unfolding at the same time, each powerful in its own way and impossible to ignore. For Becky, everything changed the instant her name became permanently attached to Nanno. Not as a replacement, not as a tribute, but as a reinvention. Industry insiders say the conversations around this role were intense and deliberate. Becky wasn't interested in copying what had already been done. She wanted to explore a darker, quieter version of Nanno, one that didn't rely on shock alone, but on psychological weight. Those close to the production noticed how seriously she approached the role. Long hours, minimal public appearances, a noticeable shift in how she spoke during rare interviews. Becky stopped selling mystery and started embodying it. Even her presence on set reportedly changed the tone of the room. Crew members described it as unsettling in the best way, as if the character lingered even when cameras stopped rolling. Fans were divided almost immediately. Some welcomed the evolution, calling it bold and necessary. Others struggled, feeling protective of the legacy attached to the character. But Becky didn't respond to the noise. She leaned into silence, letting anticipation build naturally. Every leak still, every shadowed teaser image added to the feeling that this version of Nanno wasn't meant to be comfortable. At the same time, Freen was moving in the opposite direction, outward, expansive, unmistakably global. While Becky disappeared into character, Freen appeared everywhere. Fashion weeks, brand launches, international covers. What started as selective partnerships quietly grew into something much bigger. By early 2026, it was clear this wasn't just endorsement work. It was empire building. Designers spoke about Freen not as a muse, but as a collaborator. Someone who understood branding, image, and long-term vision. Her style evolved with precision, balancing elegance and authority. Every appearance felt intentional, every outfit part of a larger narrative. She wasn't chasing trends. She was positioning herself above them. Fans began to notice how different her energy felt. Confident, composed, and globally fluent. Freen wasn't stepping away from acting. She was expanding beyond it. Turning recognition into infrastructure. Turning visibility into leverage. And that contrast became impossible to ignore. Two women once linked in public imagination were now standing on completely separate stages. One choosing darkness and depth. The other choosing scale and influence. Neither wrong, neither accidental. The fandom reacted exactly as expected, and yet differently than before. There was less direct conflict, more comparison. Less nostalgia, more curiosity. People stopped asking who was replacing whom and started asking what success really looked like in 2026. Was it disappearing into a role so completely that it unsettled viewers? Or was it building a presence so strong that it crossed industries and borders? The answer depended on who you asked. What made this era so compelling was that neither Becky nor Freen tried to define themselves against the other. There were no subtle jabs, no coded statements, no performative distance, just two women committing fully to their chosen paths. And in that commitment, something shifted. The story stopped being about separation and started being about evolution. Becky's Nanno became a symbol of creative risk, proof that stepping into a shadowed legacy didn't mean being consumed by it. Freen's fashion rise became a case study in modern celebrity power, how influence could be translated into permanence. By the time mid-2026 approached, it was clear this wasn't a rivalry fueled by conflict. It was a parallel rise shaped by intention. Two queens, two paths, and a year that refused to let either be ignored. As the year moved forward, what truly fascinated observers wasn't just how different their paths had become, but how clearly each woman seemed at peace with her choices. For Becky, the isolation that came with rewriting Nanno was not a burden, it was necessary. Insiders began sharing that her preparation went beyond scripts and rehearsals. She studied psychological thrillers, human behavior, moral ambiguity. She asked questions that made writers rethink entire scenes. Sometimes, scenes were rewritten overnight because Becky wanted the silence to speak louder than dialogue. When early test screenings quietly took place, reactions were intense. Not loud, not explosive, but deeply unsettled. Viewers described feeling watched even after the episode ended. That was when people started to understand this wasn't a dark reset for shock value. It was a shift in storytelling itself. Becky's Nanno didn't punish loudly. She waited. She observed. She let people unravel themselves. That choice alone changed how critics spoke about her. She stopped being described as the next anything. She became her own reference point. Meanwhile, Freen's momentum showed no signs of slowing. If anything, it accelerated. What fans first saw as fashion appearances evolved into strategic placements. Front-row invitations turned into closed-door meetings. Collaborations became limited collections. Limited collections hinted at something bigger. By mid-year, industry insiders were openly calling Freen a bridge between Asian influence and global luxury markets. She wasn't just wearing the brands, she was shaping how those brands spoke to new audiences. Younger, digital native, emotionally connected rather than aspirationally distant. What surprised fans most was how carefully Freen protected her narrative. Despite her global visibility, she revealed very little. No oversharing. No constant interviews. When she spoke, it was deliberate, thoughtful, and forward-looking. She talked about longevity, ownership, control. The message was subtle but clear. This wasn't a phase. As social media buzzed with comparisons, a new tone emerged. Instead of choosing sides, many fans began celebrating the contrast. Becky represented artistic risk. Freen represented strategic power. Together, they unintentionally showcased the expanded definition of success for women in the industry. Then came the moment that solidified everything. In a rare coincidence, both women made headlines within the same week. Becky's first official teaser dropped, minimalist, chilling, and entirely dialogue-free. Freen, on the other hand, was announced as the face of a global fashion campaign launching simultaneously across multiple continents. 2 announcements. Same week. Completely different energy. And yet, both dominated. Comment sections filled with one realization repeated again and again. There was no losing path here. Only different kinds of winning. By late 2026, the narrative had fully transformed. What once felt like a split became a study. A case example of how modern stardom no longer needed to follow a single script. Becky proved that depth could still command attention. Freen proved that expansion didn't require dilution. Neither chased relevance. Neither explained themselves. Both trusted their direction. And that trust, quiet, confident, unshaken, was what ultimately changed everything. Not because one overshadowed the other, but because together, in their separation, they redefined what it meant to rise. As the final quarter of the year approached, the conversation around them shifted again, this time from speculation to impact. Becky's Nanno finally reached the public, and the reaction was immediate but not explosive in the usual way. Instead of trending clips filled with dramatic scenes, what spread fastest were moments of stillness. A look held a second too long. A smile that never reached the eyes. Fans replayed scenes not to be shocked, but to understand. And that was the point. Discussion threads grew longer, darker, more analytical. People debated motives instead of outcomes. Becky's portrayal didn't tell viewers what to feel. It challenged them to sit with discomfort. Teachers, students, even critics found themselves arguing over morality rather than plot twists. For the first time in a long while, a character felt less like entertainment and more like a mirror. Becky remained quiet through it all. No victory laps. No emotional explanations. When she finally spoke, it was brief. She said the character was never meant to be liked, only remembered. That single sentence circulated for weeks. At the same time, Freen's global presence crossed a threshold. What had been fashion dominance turned into recognition of authority. She appeared not just in campaigns, but in conversations about influence and leadership. Business media began mentioning her name alongside executives, not celebrities. Rumors of ownership stakes and long-term partnerships surfaced, and unlike gossip, these didn't fade. Her image evolved again, less muse, more architect. Fans noticed how she stood during events, how she spoke without rushing, how she allowed silence to work in her favor. Freen wasn't trying to prove she belonged on the global stage. She behaved as if she already owned space there. What truly surprised everyone was how the fandom matured alongside them. Instead of rivalry, people began drawing inspiration. Young actors talked about choosing depth over speed. Creators spoke about building beyond visibility. Becky and Freen had unintentionally created two blueprints, one inward, one outward. And then something subtle but powerful happened. A rare photo surfaced. Not together. Not even at the same event. Just two separate images taken days apart. Becky, walking alone after a late shoot, face unreadable. Freen, stepping into a private meeting, calm and assured. Fans placed the photos side by side, not to compare, but to reflect. Two women, two directions, the same strength. By the time 2026 began to close, there was no longer a question of who chose the better path. The real realization was this: success was no longer singular. It was personal. Becky rewrote a legacy by going darker when it was safer to stay familiar. Freen built an empire by thinking bigger when it was easier to stay adored. Neither explained themselves. Neither looked back. And that quiet confidence, more than any role, any brand, any headline, became the most powerful statement of all.